The Patriotic Murders, a riveting tale of mystery and intrigue. The story begins in a world teetering on the brink of chaos. Whispers of betrayal and conspiracy snake through the corridors of power, casting long shadows over a nation gripped by fear and uncertainty. Patriotism, once a symbol of unity, has become a dangerous weapon, a rallying cry for loyalty and a cloak for sinister motives. In this volatile atmosphere, a murder shatters the fragile balance. The victim, a high-ranking official, a linchpin of national security. The method, chillingly precise, executed with surgical precision that leaves no doubt about its calculated intent. The nation is stunned, its leaders scrambling for answers as paranoia spreads like wildfire. Enter Hercule Poirot, the legendary Belgian detective renowned for his unparalleled intellect and unshakable determination. Reluctant at first, Poirot is drawn into the case by a desperate plea from an old acquaintance, a figure deeply entwined with the victim. As Poirot surveys the crime scene, his sharp, discerning eyes lock onto details that others dismiss. The subtle arrangement of objects on a desk, a peculiar smudge on the window pane, and a cryptic note that seems to whisper secrets. Monday, Ami. Poirot muses to his trusted companion, his voice tinged with curiosity and gravity. We are dealing with a killer who is both cunning and calculating. This is not a crime of passion, but one of meticulous design. The question is, pourquoi? Why? Thus, the stage is set for an electrifying tale of mystery and intrigue. Every clue peels back a layer of deception. Every revelation sharpens the focus on the truth, and every suspect harbors a motive shrouded in shadows. The chase for justice begins, and Poirot must navigate a labyrinth of lies to uncover a killer who thrives in the dark recesses of power. 2. Rising tension. The killer strikes again. This time, the murder is even more elaborate, the message more provocative, and the fear more palpable. The city is no longer a place of routine and order, but a tense battleground, where every shadow holds the potential for betrayal. Poirot finds himself pulled deeper into a labyrinth of deceit, where the stakes grow higher with each passing moment. The pattern of the murders begins to reveal itself, each victim a seemingly random choice connected to a greater scheme, a hidden agenda that lurks just beyond the surface. Poirot's keen mind works tirelessly, piecing together the fragments of information that point toward a chilling conclusion. Each clue feels like a piece of a puzzle, but the picture they form is still maddeningly incomplete. As the killer's confidence grows, so does their brazenness. A chilling message is left at the latest crime scene, written in bold, deliberate strokes, for the good of the nation. It's a declaration that twists the concept of patriotism into something dark and perverse. Poirot studies the note carefully, noting the peculiarities in the handwriting, the ink smudges, and the paper's texture. Every detail is a potential key to unlocking the killer's identity. The atmosphere in the city becomes suffocating. News of the murders dominates every conversation, and trust erodes rapidly among friends, colleagues, and even families. The tension is palpable as suspicions run rampant. Poirot's presence is both a beacon of hope and a reminder of the grim reality they face. Among the chaos, a new suspect emerges. This individual's connections to the victims are undeniable, but something about their demeanor doesn't sit right with Poirot. Their calmness feels calculated, their answers rehearsed. Poirot watches them intently, his sharp eyes noting every hesitation, every involuntary gesture that betrays their nerves. Still, he knows this might be a distraction, a carefully constructed alibi meant to lead him astray. Poirot's investigation takes him into the heart of the city's most powerful circles. He interviews politicians, military officials and influential figures, all of whom seem to harbor secrets of their own. Each conversation feels like a game of chess, with every question carefully calculated to provoke a revealing response. Poirot's questions cut through the facades, exposing cracks in their stories, but he remains acutely aware that his every move is being watched. The killer's motives begin to crystallize in Poirot's mind. This isn't just about murder. It's about sending a message, reshaping the nation's identity through fear and manipulation. Poirot's determination intensifies. He must not only stop the killer, but also unmask the twisted ideology driving their actions. The pressure mounts as another murder occurs, this one even closer to Poirot's circle. A figure he'd interviewed a witness with a small but significant piece of the puzzle becomes the latest victim. Poirot feels the weight of the loss, the sting of being one step behind the killer. The loss fuels his resolve, pushing him to dig deeper into the web of lies and deceit. As Poirot pieces together the clues, he begins to sense a larger conspiracy at play. This isn't the work of a single individual, but a coordinated effort with far-reaching implications. The realization sends a chill down Poirot's spine. He knows the truth is within reach, but every answer seems to lead to more questions. The killer's endgame remains elusive, their motives shrouded in secrecy. Poirot gathers the suspects, determined to expose the killer among them. In a dramatic confrontation, he lays out the intricate web of evidence, his voice steady and commanding. The room grows silent as Poirot recounts the chain of events, pointing out the subtle clues that only he could see. The tension in the room is palpable, every eye fixed on Poirot as he edges closer to the truth. As the chapter ends, Poirot issues a chilling warning. This game of cat and mouse is nearing its end, but beware, the most dangerous players have yet to reveal themselves. The stage is set for a climactic showdown, where every revelation will bring Poirot closer to unmasking the mastermind behind the murders. 3. Deepening mystery. Hercule Poirot steps into the shadows of a world where truth and deception intertwine like a deadly dance. With every step closer to the heart of the mystery, the layers of political intrigue grow darker and more labyrinthine. This is no ordinary investigation. Behind each clue lies a network of secret alliances, betrayals, and power plays that threaten the fragile balance of the nation. The case takes an unexpected turn as Poirot discovers a cache of coded documents hidden in the home of one of the victims. The papers, meticulously concealed within a hollowed-out book, are a masterwork of encryption, a trail of breadcrumbs leading to an elusive truth. Poirot examines the symbols and codes with precision, his mind piecing together patterns that would baffle even the most astute cryptographer. The revelations point to a covert group operating within the highest echelons of power, their motives concealed beneath layers of secrecy. As Poirot delves deeper, he uncovers shocking connections between the victims. What seemed at first to be unrelated murders now reveal a chilling pattern. Each victim held a piece of knowledge that, when combined, could expose a devastating truth. Poirot realizes he is not just unraveling a murder spree, is dismantling a conspiracy that reaches into the nation's core. The detective's inquiries lead him into dangerous territory. Late one evening, Poirot receives an anonymous tip to meet at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The location, cloaked in darkness and decay, oozes an air of foreboding. As Poirot steps inside, he is met with an unsettling sight. A single, flickering bulb illuminating a table piled with incriminating documents. Before he can examine them thoroughly, a shadow moves, and Poirot narrowly escapes an attack. It's clear someone is watching his every move, determined to keep the truth buried. The political web grows more tangled as Poirot interviews key figures. Ministers and officials, each with their polished veneers, reveal cracks under Poirot's relentless scrutiny. One particularly heated encounter, with a high-ranking official, ends with a chilling warning. "You don't know what you are meddling with, Monsieur Poirot. Some secrets are meant to stay buried." Poirot's sharp mind interprets this not as a threat, but as a confession of guilt. He notes the subtle tremor in the man's hand, and the darting of his eyes, telltale signs of a man grappling with his own duplicity. The trail of betrayal leads Poirot to uncover a hidden alliance between unexpected parties. Secret meetings in the dead of night, encrypted correspondence, and untraceable financial transactions paint a picture of a coalition driven by greed and ambition. These alliances cross political lines, uniting sworn enemies in their pursuit of mutual gain. Poirot's frustration grows as the deeper he digs, the more he realizes the enormity of the forces working against him. The detective begins to piece together the roles of the victims within the grander scheme. Each one had been a gatekeeper of a critical piece of information. A whistleblower on corruption, a journalist uncovering scandal, a bureaucrat preparing to leak damning evidence. Together, they were a threat. Alone, they became targets. Poirot's heart sinks as he realizes the sheer ruthlessness of the conspiracy, a network that eliminates anyone who dares to disrupt its carefully constructed facade. Poirot's investigation grows increasingly perilous. One evening, as he returns to his apartment, he finds it ransacked. Drawers have been overturned, papers scattered, and a warning scrawled across the mirror in red ink. "Leave while you still can." Poirot stares at the message unshaken. "If they think this will deter me, they underestimate Hercule Poirot," he murmurs, his resolve hardening. Despite the danger, Poirot presses on, uncovering a lead that takes him to the opulent estate of a powerful industrialist. The man, seemingly above reproach, is a cornerstone of the conspiracy. Poirot's visit is met with thinly veiled hostility. As he navigates the estate's grand halls, he observes the subtle indicators of guilt. A hastily closed safe, a ledger deliberately left out of view, and a sudden shift in the man's demeanor when confronted with pointed questions. The threads of the mystery begin to converge, forming a chilling portrait of corruption and ambition. Poirot realizes that the murders were not merely a means to silence the victims, but also a massage demonstration of the lengths to which the conspirators are willing to go to protect their secrets. In a dramatic climax to this chapter of the investigation, Poirot sets a trap to draw out one of the key conspirators. At a glittering gala, attended by the city's elite, Poirot maneuvers the players into position, using their own ambitions against them. Under the dazzling lights of the ballroom, the trap is sprung. The evening ends not with champagne toasts, but with the arrest of a figure whose betrayal sends shockwaves through the upper echelons of society. As the chapter closes, Poirot reflects on the complexity of human nature. When greed and power blind the soul, he muses, murder becomes a tool and loyalty a game. But no matter how deep the mystery, the truth will always rise to the surface. The mystery deepens further, but Poirot is undeterred. With every revelation, the stakes grow higher, and the true face of the conspiracy comes closer into focus. Yet the most dangerous secrets remain just out of reach, and Poirot knows the endgame is approaching. His brilliance will be tested as never before, and the nation's fate may hinge on his success. The personal betrayal. As Hercule Poirot delves deeper into the labyrinth of deceit, a chilling twist emerges. Someone intimately connected to the victims is not who they appear to be. A close friend or trusted family member, once thought to be a grieving ally, becomes the nexus of suspicion. The revelation sends shockwaves through the investigation, adding an unsettling layer of betrayal to an already tangled web. Poirot's suspicions begin innocently enough. A casual observation during a meeting with a relative of one of the victims, a faint hesitation in their speech, a sudden aversion to eye contact piques his curiosity. At first, he attributes it to the strain of grief, but as he pieces together seemingly unrelated fragments, a darker picture begins to form. A chance discovery intensifies the mystery. Among the victim's personal effects, Poirot finds an old photograph tucked into a journal. The image shows the victim and their supposed confidant, arm in arm, smiling broadly. But Poirot's sharp eyes catch something others might miss: the faint outline of someone cropped out of the picture. Who was this third person, and why were they removed from the memory? Poirot's inquiries take him to the quiet suburbs where the friend resides. The house, outwardly ordinary, brims with secret. As Poirot observes the surroundings, he notices subtle inconsistencies: the hurriedly closed curtains, the faint smell of smoke suggesting documents recently burned, and the nervous energy radiating from the person before him. Over tea, Poirot gently steers the conversation toward the past. "You were very close to our victim, were you not?" he inquires, his voice light yet probing. The response is immediate but faltering, the carefully constructed facade showing its first crack, a clue that changes everything. As Poirot continues to investigate, he uncovers a hidden correspondence between the friend and another key figure in the case. The letters are cryptic, but reveal enough to suggest a relationship far more complex than mere friendship. Poirot pores over the documents, each word feeding his growing conviction that this person is not just a grieving acquaintance, but a linchpin in the conspiracy. In one letter, Poirot spots a recurring motif, a signature marked with an unusual flourish. When compared against other documents found at the crime scenes, the connection becomes undeniable. The friend had not only been involved but was actively communicating with the victim's and possibly the killer. The web of lies tighten. Poirot arranges a confrontation. Under the guise of seeking further clarity, he invites the individual to a public setting where their reactions can be carefully observed. At a bustling cafe, Poirot plays his cards subtly. He presents fragments of evidence: the letters, the photograph, the cropped-out figure, and watches as his suspect's composure crumbles. Their initial denial is forceful, even indignant. "How dare you insinuate such things?" they exclaim, their voice trembling. But Poirot presses on, his calm demeanor unshaken. "Mademoiselle," Poirot says softly, his piercing gaze locking onto theirs. "When one lies, it is not the words that betray them, but the eyes, and your eyes tell me a story you wish to hide." Caught in the web of Poirot's logic, the suspect stumbles. They admit to knowing more than they initially revealed, but stop short of confessing to any crime. Their half-truths only deepen Poirot's determination to uncover the full extent of their involvement. The family connection unveiled. A breakthrough comes when Poirot examines the victim's financial records. A series of unexplained transactions points to a hidden account, one that ties directly to their so-called friend. Poirot deduces that this person had been siphoning funds under the guise of helping the victim manage their finances. The trail of deceit doesn't end there. It leads to a larger plot involving key players in the conspiracy. The most shocking twist comes during a late-night revelation. Poirot receives a package containing an old family heirloom locket belonging to the victim, along with a note written in a trembling hand. "I tried to warn them, but I was too late. Now they'll come for me too." The handwriting matches that of the suspect, but the tone suggests fear rather than malice. Poirot realizes the truth. This individual is not the mastermind, but a pawn caught in the crossfire. Their betrayal, though real, was born out of desperation rather than greed. The final confrontation. Poirot orchestrates a dramatic finale, inviting all key figures to a neutral location. The room buzzes with tension as Poirot unveils his findings. "You believed yourself clever," he says, addressing the suspect. "But in your haste to deceive, you overlooked one simple fact. Hercule Poirot always finds the truth." Piece by piece, Poirot reconstructs the timeline, revealing how the suspect's actions fit into the larger scheme. He exposes the cropped photograph, the financial records, and the coded letters, each one a damning piece of evidence. The room falls silent as the full weight of Poirot's deductions sinks in. In a final twist, Poirot offers the suspect a chance at redemption. "You are guilty of betrayal, yes," he acknowledges, "but you are not beyond saving. Tell us everything you know, and perhaps justice will temper mercy with understanding." Overcome by guilt and fear, the suspect breaks down, revealing critical information about the conspiracy's inner workings. Their confession provides Poirot with the final pieces needed to dismantle the plot once and for all. As the chapter closes, Poirot reflects on the frailty of human nature. Betrayal, he muses, is a knife that cuts both ways. For those who wield it, the wound is often deepest. The mystery, though unraveling, is far from over. With the conspiracy's roots exposed, Poirot knows the most dangerous players remain in the shadows. Yet, armed with new revelations, he steels himself for the battles yet to come. The chase is on, and the game has never been more perilous. The final confrontation loomed over the investigation like a storm waiting to break. Hercule Poirot stood in the heart of the grand drawing room, his mind sharp and unfaltering as always. He had assembled the suspects, each one carefully placed in their designated spot, the shadows of their guilt weighing heavily upon them. They were a mix of high society and military men, their lives intertwined by a delicate thread of duty, loyalty, and patriotism until that thread snapped under the weight of a brutal murder. The truth had been elusive, slipping through Poirot's grasp with every new clue. But now, in the stillness of the room, everything began to fall into place. The motive behind the killings, twisted and personal, was about to be revealed in its full, devastating form. Poirot's gaze swept across the faces of the suspects, each one seemingly holding their breath. It was as though they were all aware of the inevitable, and yet none of them dared to move. There was a quiet, almost imperceptible tension in the air, a buzz that whispered of the darkness they had all tried to hide. The story that had been unfolding before Poirot's very eyes was one of betrayal, manipulation, and a single-minded pursuit of vengeance disguised as a noble cause. At the center of it all stood the killer, someone who had hidden in plain sight, using the banners of patriotism and loyalty to disguise their true motives. The love of their country, which they had so fiercely proclaimed, had been twisted into something dark and personal. Poirot had been patient. He had asked the right questions, observed every detail, and examined the smallest inconsistencies in the suspect's stories. It had all led him to this moment. The killer had made a fatal mistake, slip of the tongue, an unguarded glance at something so subtle, yet so revealing, that Poirot had been able to see through the facade. As the room grew even more silent, he turned to face the one person who had seemed almost too innocent to be involved, the one who had played the part of the concerned citizen, the quiet observer. But now, the final truth was staring him in the face. The murderer's eyes flickered for just a second, the mask cracking. In that instant, Poirot knew he had them. The killer's calm demeanor wavered, replaced by something darker, an unmistakable flash of guilt, mixed with desperation. And then, with a slow, deliberate motion, the murderer stepped forward, revealing their true intentions to the group. The truth was as shocking as it was inevitable. They had killed not for the ideals of their country, as they had claimed, but for a personal vendetta, one that had festered for years in the shadows of their heart. A betrayal so deep that it had become an obsession, a need for retribution that had clouded their judgment and blinded them to the consequences of their action. The murders had been a means to an end, a twisted form of justice, where the murderer believed they were righting a wrong. They had used patriotism as a shield, a tool to manipulate the emotions of those around them, to rally support and deflect suspicion. But in reality, it had been a mask, a convenient excuse for something much more personal and much darker. The room seemed to hold its breath as the killer spoke, their voice cold but resolute. They had been wronged, betrayed by someone they trusted, and now they had taken matters into their own hands. The deaths of the victims were not just random acts of violence, they were carefully calculated strikes against those who had wronged them, who had cost them something they could never recover. Each murder had been a step in their plan for revenge, a twisted form of justice they believed was owed to them. Poirot listened carefully, his expression unreadable. He had heard many stories in his time tales of heartbreak, betrayal, and revenge, but this one was different. The murderer's sense of justice was warped, their motives so tangled in personal grievance that they had become blind to the greater consequences of their actions. They had been willing to sacrifice everything, even their own integrity, in the name of a misguided, twisted form of patriotism. As the killer spoke, Poirot's mind raced through the puzzle, piecing together the final fragments of the story. It was clear now every move, every action, every calculated decision had been a part of a larger, more sinister plan. The murders were not an act of duty or honor. They were the result of a mind driven by revenge, a mind so consumed by anger and hatred that it had no room for reason or morality. The killer had used the ideals of patriotism as a veil, a mask to hide their true intentions. But Poirot had seen through it all. He had known from the start that this was not a case of honor, but of vengeance twisted beyond recognition. The revelation sent a ripple through the room, shock, disbelief, and finally, a grim understanding. The true nature of the murders had been exposed, and with it, the truth behind the killer's actions. It was a revelation that felt both inevitable and unsettling. The murderer had killed for a cause that was personal, not national, and in doing so, they had warped the very ideals they claimed to uphold. Poirot stood there, unmoving, as the killer's confession echoed in the stillness of the room. His sharp mind had unraveled the layers of deception, exposing the raw, unvarnished truth. The killer's motivations, once hidden in the murky depths of their mind, were now laid bare for all to see, and with that final revelation, the case was closed. But the story didn't end there. For Poirot, the true weight of the case was not in the solving of the mystery, but in the understanding of the human condition, the way in which personal vendettas could twist noble ideals into something dark and destructive. The theme of patriotism, so often revered and upheld, had been shattered, revealing the ugly truth that sometimes the greatest threats to a nation were not external, but internal, born of personal grudges, vendettas, and the dangerous power of a twisted sense of justice. The murderer had sought to restore balance, but in doing so, they had created chaos. They had taken the very thing they claimed to protect patriotism and distorted it into something monstrous. As Poirot looked around the room, he could see the weight of the revelation settling on each of the faces before him. Some were relieved, others were horrified, but all were forced to confront the true cost of the murders. It was a sobering reminder that the pursuit of justice, when driven by personal vengeance, could have far-reaching consequences. With the case solved and the killer unmasked, Poirot's mind turned inward, reflecting on the lesson the story had taught him. He knew that in this world, patriotism could be a powerful force, but when twisted by personal emotions and unhealed wounds, it could become a weapon of destruction. The truth had been revealed, but the consequences of that truth would linger long after the killer was taken away, and that, Poirot knew, was the most chilling revelation of all. The case was finally closed. Hercule Poirot stood in the quiet aftermath, his eyes surveying the room with the sharp, calculating gaze that had guided him to the truth. The murderer had been unmasked, their motives exposed for all to see, but as Poirot lingered over the conclusion, a sense of unease gnawed at him. The mystery had been solved, the killer apprehended, and yet, something about the case didn't feel quite finished. There was a shadow hanging over the resolution, a lingering question that Poirot could not quite shake. The killer's twisted sense of patriotism had driven them to commit heinous acts in the name of loyalty and national pride. But had they truly been in the wrong? Was their warped interpretation of duty so different from the lofty ideals espoused by those who had built the very foundations of the nation? The cost of loyalty had been made abundantly clear in the wake of the murders. It was a cost that had been paid not just by the victims, but by the killer themselves. Their sense of justice, so deeply rooted in personal revenge, had driven them to a place where their actions could no longer be seen as mere acts of retribution. They had blurred the lines between right and wrong, between honor and betrayal, and in doing so, had cast a dark shadow over the very concept of patriotism. Poirot's mind, ever the analytical machine, churned over the complexities of the case. It was clear that the killer had been driven by an intense sense of loyalty to a cause that they believed justified every action, every death, every lie. And yet, as Poirot had uncovered layer after layer of deception, it had become impossible to ignore the fact that the killer's pursuit of justice had been tainted by something more personal, more dangerous than patriotism. It had been fueled by a thirst for vengeance, masked in the rhetoric of duty and honor. But the question lingered: had they truly been wrong in their pursuit? Was it so easy to dismiss their motives as misguided? And, perhaps most unsettling of all, how many others had fallen into the same trap, believing that their actions, however extreme, were justified by a higher calling? The moral ambiguity of patriotism hung heavily in the air, a cloud that Poirot could not dispel. It was easy to claim that loyalty to one's country was a noble cause, a virtue that defined the very essence of a person's character. But what happens when that loyalty is manipulated, twisted into a justification for acts of violence and retribution? What happens when the love of country becomes a weapon, wielded by those who are willing to sacrifice anything, including their own humanity, in its name? Poirot had seen firsthand the devastation wrought by such a twisted version of patriotism. He had seen the cost of loyalty, and it was not a price anyone could truly afford. As the investigation came to a close, Poirot found himself reflecting on the aftermath. The characters who had been swept up in this tragedy, those who had been deceived by the killer's carefully crafted facade, were left to confront the reality of their own involvement. Some had been blinded by their own sense of loyalty, unable to see the darker side of the cause they had championed. Others had been swept along by the tide of nationalism, caught up in the fervor of a movement they believed was righteous. But in the end, they were all left to face the consequences of their actions, realizing that the line between right and wrong had not been as clear-cut as they had once believed. There were no easy answers in the aftermath of the murders. The killer had been caught, justice had been served in the eyes of the law, but the moral questions remained. The complexity of justice itself had been laid bare, and it was a complexity that none of the characters nor Poirot himself could ignore. In their pursuit of what they believed to be right, they had all been forced to sacrifice something. For some, it had been their own sense of morality. For others, their trust in the ideals they had long held dear. And for the killer, it had been their very soul, corrupted by a thirst for vengeance that had ultimately consumed them. Poirot, standing alone in the quiet room, could not help but reflect on the nature of sacrifice. He had spent his life solving mysteries, uncovering truths, but never before had he been confronted with a question as profound as the one this case had posed. How much was too much to sacrifice in the name of loyalty? How far could one stretch the boundaries of justice before they snapped? And, most chilling of all, could the pursuit of justice itself become a monstrous thing, a force that consumed everything in its path, leaving only devastation behind? The resolution of the case had brought no sense of triumph for Poirot. There was no satisfaction in the killer's confession, no relief in the fact that justice had been served. Instead, there was a deep, unsettling sense of ambivalence. The killer had been caught, but at what cost? The nation, the ideals of loyalty and patriotism, had been forever tainted by the actions of one person who had twisted everything they believed in for their own personal gain. And now, the nation would have to reckon with the consequences of that betrayal, just as the characters involved would have to reconcile with the part they had played in the tragedy. For Poirot, the lesson was clear. The pursuit of justice was never as simple as it seemed. The line between right and wrong was often blurred, especially when emotions, such as loyalty and love for one's country, were involved. He had seen how the noblest of ideals could be warped and manipulated, turned into something dark and destructive. And in the end, the true cost of loyalty, of national pride, was not just the lives lost or the reputations shattered. It was the disillusionment that came when the truth was finally exposed. The realization that the very ideals one had fought for could, in the end, become the catalyst for their own destruction. As Poirot left the scene, his mind heavy with the weight of the case, he couldn't help but wonder how many more would fall victim to the same fatal flaw, that dangerous belief that loyalty, in all its forms, was always justifiable. He had solved the mystery, but the questions it raised would linger, haunting him long after the case had been closed. In the end, the truth had been revealed, but the shadows of moral ambiguity would remain, casting a dark pall over the very concepts of justice, loyalty, and sacrifice.